Hello there, self-caring artists and creatives, performers, and entrepreneurs. I'm Marissa Moses. So this is my first video back after our daily December embodiment challenge, which was a video every single day for the month of December, where I read something out of a book. Maybe it was a prompt, maybe it was a passage. And then I did a little embodiment practice, a little somatic attunement. So attuning to my body and then being with the whatever came forth from there. It's an intuitive practice. For me, it's a sacred art form of connection to the inner and outer experiences of the unseen. And so we go into some of the subconscious realms, some of the spiritual realms, some of the connection points that are maybe in the playing space of a lot of the subtext of our lives, in our personal lives, our communal lives, our collective experience of humanity out there in the world. So today, as our first video back, I'm going to see about releasing, I'm thinking, one video a week and feeling into flow. It feels good to me, and you might find this for yourself. So this might be a self-care practice for you. When I have enough of a structure or framework to where I feel like I have like an orienting grounding piece to come back to and feel held or safe with relating to, but yet it's an anchor and it allows me to not feel lost, but also can be a platform for me to sort of jump off of or fly from. My intention today is I relabeled the same little Zoom link I've been recording my Daily Decembers on into a new title. So instead of Daily December Embodiment Practice, it is now, I'm just titling it Creative Flow, and it's going to be a weekly share for self-care for performers. And what's coming up today, as opposed to doing the book and the like working through a lot of stuff, is I kind of want to dip back into cards. So those of you who've been in my classes, those of you who've been in my circles I've held and hosted, you know that I really enjoy the uncertainty of not knowing what you're going to get moment to moment, but also having a kind of practice that guides you into the unknown so that you don't feel like you're just tossed into chaos and have to find your way out, which I've done plenty of that too in my own life or on stage, even sometimes where I'm like, I'm just going to figure it out. I've done the emotional research and I have a sense of like the integrity of what I want to bring. And I'm going to just go and trust that I'm going to keep stepping into the moment, and whatever arises is going to arise, regardless of how I did practice certain things or didn't practice certain things that want to come and flower into space in the moment. I really love aliveness. I really love possibility. I really love chance. And so today, here we are. I pulled out a couple of card decks, but the one that's pulling for me today is this one, Mindfulness Cards, Simple Practices for Everyday Life. And there's something really practical about this card deck. It feels, some of my cards have different flavors to them. And I find that for self-care for performers, even though there's part of me that wants to just be like, it's performance magic and let's go into the shadow and let's be with our magic. And I also recognize that for me to really connect with the full expanse of my community, as you are, not just those of you who are maybe longing for the same thing that I am, but meeting the collection of bodies and souls in my relational care for the diversity of personal sense of orientation and felt safety. I think it's important for me to, as much as possible, continue to connect into mindfulness so that we can kind of titrate a little bit more into the fuller depth of the wholeness of who we are. Because when we really deepen into a sense of soul security, what we have to do is often practice going into the shadows, the corners, the darkness of the aspects of ourselves that we've pushed away because we've either been asked to in exchange for relational connection. And that can happen in implicit or explicit ways. So some of those of you who've been in like high control training environments in the performing arts or high control religious experiences in the way in which you've been raised, those sort of narcissistic psychological structural models will sometimes give us a sense of orienting to safety and orienting to, oh, okay, I'm not lost. And there's sort of like a easier way to find your way through, right? When you have more clarity or sense of being held or a relationship to something or someone or some force that has control and hopefully goodwill, right? There is a greater ability in the body from that mindset to relax into everything's okay. Or it can be. But the thing is that when we're doing that in exchange for self-betrayal, that's when we start fragmenting aspects of who we are. And I'm not saying that everybody does that in order to be in more high control environments, because I'm not everybody. It might just be perfectly suited for some people. Yet, for most of my community that I've spoken with, for most of the research that I've done, for most of the sort of witnessing of how certain leaders or practitioners or belief systems sort of operate in like a psychophysical dynamic space. And I say that because I also have a history of being not only a dancer and an actor. So looking at sort of body language and subtext, reading between the lines, but I've also been a massage therapist for over a decade. And so I've trained in what's called palpation, how to feel into what you can't quite see, but you can start to see if you learn how to feel sense on different layers and levels. So there is an energetic component to the things that I do, the way that I see, the knowledge that I bring in essence through my own body, but also invite into the connection between you and yours for those of you who enter into the spaces that I hold. So speaking of spaces, we're going to get to this in a moment, but speaking of spaces, I do want to invite you on January 8th, on the second Sunday of every month. I am hosting a class, and I have been doing so for a while, but I've also been scared to really super promote it because I have attachment wounds and I have relational trauma, especially as it relates to the work that I do and the way that I feel most honest about who I am in the world, because it has a tendency to bring up uncertainties or fears in groups of others. And while there's a degree of like stillness I've had to hold through that space and have the capacity to do, I just, with the whole great wide sea of the internet, there's just a part of me that was like, I need to bring the part of me that's really honest about how much it hurts me to have to be that relational anchor all the time. There needs to be a component of my work that I'm also saying like, hey, I'm tired. Meaning that I'm tired of having to self-betray in order to meet others in their needs. And I am looking for others who might feel the same. I'm looking for connection points with others who have a core alignment to a desire for felt safety, regardless of your background and your beliefs and your identity and how it feels best for you to move through the world, that there is a desire for simultaneous understanding that it's important for nobody to step into self-betrayal in order to find relational health. And sometimes that means that we need to leave or part ways with relational dynamics or with relationships for either a period of time, a cycle of time, or possibly durationally for the remainder of our life, depending on where our growth and where someone else's growth is or isn't. But there is also a place of potential connection that opens up when you can agree upon that kind of mutually consensual and relationally intentional ways of coming in together where you desire to be in support of one another and there are compatible relational needs. So for me, in self-care for performers very specifically, and I've had a hard time with this because I have a lot of money wounds and self-worth and value, and being a biracial woman and a performing artist, there's a lot tied up to like having to work for not a lot of money or for free forever. So I have a lot of that wounding in my experience. And so to step into an experience of saying a lot of the work that I've predominantly done invisibly or behind the scenes or quietly or just in the name of friendship, it's a skill set of mine. It's a very practical, tactical skill set of mine. And I know that I'm good at it. And I know that I have the capacity for it. And I also know that what was challenging for me was I was bringing those skills that I know are there and that I've spent a lot of years honing very strategically and very intentionally and very practically, and that there was not an agreement, a mutually consensual agreement where I was coming into connection with others who want to have a relational exchange with me for the wealth of knowledge and skills and practice that I'm able to bring into connection between us, like coaching. It's still scary for me to say, but what I'm finding for me is I had this big backlash of like, oh gosh, like I would see some are my friends and some are coaches that I would coach with. And I'm like, they're doing the same thing I do, or they're even not doing it. Like they're missing some things and I'm watching them work through it. And then but I see it along the way. I'm like, I have a lot of capacity and they're charging like $750 an hour. They're charging like up to 50 grand for coaching with them. And I'm like mind blowing. And I'm starting to get resentful because so much of what I've been offering, it's been 2 years now. Most of the work that I'm going to cry, but most of the work that I've done is free and investment. And part of that I know is because I've been in this place where I haven't been able to find my own congruency, right? So this is again transparency for you. So if you're a performing artist and maybe you're going out there and you're like, I'm a great performer. Why are all my friends getting this and I'm getting this, right? So, but this is the same kind of like relational dynamic. And there's this space we're at, and then there's this space we see others at, and then we understand we have the capacity and we already are sort of executing things at their level or layer, but there's like a missing piece or component. And so often that really has to do with clarity of intention, boundaries, and willingness to be brave and ask for what you want, ask for what you're looking for, ask for what you need, and then have the nuanced conversation about, well, what are the agreements to get us into a mutually supportive and reciprocal relationship where needs are being met. For me, I want to build my community, but I also very specifically need and want to create a thriving business. And the word business scares me. And maybe you find this as a performing artist going into the industry or going into the business of the performing arts. There's this sort of, and I've had this as a performing artist too, this sort of freeze that some of us get, and maybe not all of us, but some of us will get that. It's like, I'm not allowed or I don't want to. And there's all these like ideas of how business is bad, about how relating from a kind of either extractive or trying to get ahead mentality is not something we want to foster in our lives. But then how do we engage if we're not also trying to expand our connections and really aim and go and look for what we want? And I'm in that conversation with myself right now. So part of what we'll be working through today might be, I mean, it already is involved in that. And it'll probably be a theme that keeps coming into connection as I build and grow the capacity to be like, hey, I'm a business owner and what I have is valuable. And the way in which I'm bridging that space right now is in part also because like I know like I want to work with people of different backgrounds, and I come from a lot of challenging experiences. I have different degrees in my extended family of placements. But overall, my relationship to money is mostly the poverty level or lower class. And I also have access points to a lot of my family that really wanted to present forward their experience of abundance. And abundance feels so good when you have it. And maybe this is you too, because this is a lot of performing artists I know. Sometimes we feel so depleted. Sometimes we legitimately, logistically just don't have enough, whether that's energy or emotional capacity or time or resources, all sorts of things. And we still want to live into a life where we don't let the fear of not having those things keep us from moving forward. But also sometimes we'll bulldoze ourselves past real limits, like real actual limits, and we'll stretch ourselves further than we really can take a bounce back from. And I've done that in the past by opening up a business, a dance studio, and in being founding executive director of a theater company with friends, and having things fall to piece, needing to file for bankruptcy bankruptcy to get out of the liability, having a 6-year really intense depression and recovery. I've struggled with mood, anxiety, and depression my whole life, but it was an extremely severe experience and was just really feeling like I was starting to come out of that. And then something fell through again, and then was starting to come out of that, and then something fell through again. And I'm not going to go into the details of those because they feel just too personal and spiritually tender. But what I do know is after my many roller coaster waves is we can find a way to kind of roll with the flow of it and kind of surf the waves of our emotional lives and the hands that life throws us. And some of it we do not have control of. And also there is a degree that I've found for myself and that I've heard certain people speak about is that you can, though, build more secure ways of living. You can build more secure ways of being in relationship to yourself that can then help you foster more secure ways in which you relate with others and invite them into their own sense of security, self-security, and then relational security between you and them. And can you do that with everyone? Absolutely not. No, because people can only meet you at their capacity, and we can only meet others at our capacity. And part of my 31-day embodiment challenge that I did was to help me move through creative blocks that I needed to move through in order to release my podcast episodes. I have like 12 in the can of like interviews with friends. But what I've been finding is that so much of my relational fears and traumas and patterns, my complex challenges were coming up in those relational dynamics during the conversations. And I wasn't as present and alive in relationship to the person that was in front of me, in large part because I was terrified of the you out there that would be listening and anticipating there being a triangulation, anticipating there being judgments of either yourself based on what someone said or of them based on what someone said or on me based on what I said or just all like I was just like crippled with fear. And the time of the world that we're into when there's so much social unrest and so many abusive dynamics that are present and so much call for activism, but also depending on the lens. And I think activism is so important and so valid and so necessary for the course of history. And at the same time, depending on how we approach it, depending on how we go about being change makers, we may be inviting further intimacy and possibility of change, or we might be really pushing it away and repelling it. And this isn't to say that pushing away and repelling something that's not for us isn't healthy and necessary to do, because it absolutely is. It's part of understanding when we feel like the emotional content that is anger, it means either we or someone else, there's a boundary being crossed, spiritual, emotional, psychological, whatever it is, physical, and that there needs to be a creating of space, of distance, of more boundaried experience. So the greater boundaries, I think, is important. And also the willingness to release control of what we think another person should do or how they should behave or how they should love or feel or experience or whatnot. We all have our completely different inner lives and worlds. And to be able to see each other there, I think can be so beautiful and so healing when we can do that for one another in relational dynamic. And sometimes I work through things like that in a sort of improv and embodiment practice, sometimes personally, which I've sort of done in my 31-day embodiment challenge, so you can kind of see it, but also interrelationally with others in dyads or triads or group ensemble dynamics. And it can become a kind of sacred theater when we enter it intentionally with the heart and the clarity of wanting to find a way through into deeper connection and to potentially resolve some unmet underlying needs that maybe present themselves through a series of coping strategies or big personality dynamics and things like that, which I think in essence is what the performing arts is and does. It allows us to step into a role in a story to play out some sort of cycle of theater, right, of drama, and then find a completion. And depending on the story, there's different kinds of completion processes. What I'm looking to find for myself and for the bodies that enter enter my space, regardless of the stories that you then go out and tell in the world. But the stories that we tell inside of our own practices, inside of our sort of sacred theater, creative intimacy, relational dynamic that we can hold, is to find a sense of being able to trust ourselves, trust one another, and trust the life that we are writing. It's sort of like a Taoist, Tao. It looks like Tao, but from my understanding, it's pronounced Tao or Taoism. And there's this flow as well as structure, right? You have your masculine and your feminine components, and you have your light and your dark. You have what can sometimes be put at odds in binaries, except that they flow together and they're able to be in a kind of relational dance for fluidity of harmony, flow, love, whatever you want to call it. Julia Cameron uses the acronym GOD for good orderly direction. I am not in a place where I can say it as a word, because I don't want to, because there's just so much loaded in that word. And you might have a completely different perspective, and that word might sing to your soul. And have been in previous cycles feeling really clear that I need and want to deconstruct all the ways in why that word can't be a good word. And maybe I will continue to, but for the sake and pleasure of our time together today, I am going to release that and allow that to just be whatever it is on your end, and allow it to know where I stand from on mine. And we're going to pick a card. We've got 4 different varietals. We've got rest and balance, curiosity and joy, insight and awareness, and kindness. Which one do you think I'm going to pick? Let's see. I'm really feeling curiosity and joy. And we're just going to do the front card. Let's see what comes up. Vacation Mind. This is our card for today. And it says, one of the wonderful things about going on a vacation is the delight that comes with exploring a new place. With so much newness to experience, the mind becomes bright, awake, and alive as it takes in all the sights, sounds, smells, and tastes. But you don't need to be on vacation to approach the day like this. You can tap into your vacation mind at any time. Try taking a 20-minute walk around the neighborhood and take in the surroundings like a tourist, looking for remarkable things you haven't paid attention to before, big or small, and meeting them with freshness and interest. So that's your exercise. That's your practice today. This invitation from this mindfulness cards deck. I'll leave a link down in the description in case anyone is interested in it. So your practice today is to take a 20-minute walk around your neighborhood like you're a tourist, and see what you see in new eyes. What would you not have noticed if it was just the same old, versus what do you notice if it's new and you're on vacation? And since this is self-care for performers too, I want to invite you to perhaps do that with your performance practice. Invite yourself like a patron into your practice. You know how, so for like the larger companies that have a lot of funding and maybe have a lot of patrons, and some of the things that they will give in reciprocal exchange for donations is access to process and development of the beautiful work that ends up becoming the piece at the end of the day. And so I want to invite you also into maybe, what if you viewed your personal practice, whether you're a dancer or an actor or a singer, songwriter, musician, or any other form of performing artist you might be, or creative, just person embodied. I know some of you aren't necessarily performing artists, but you are either reconnecting to a different kind of spirituality after some really harsh, high control environments, or you also might be someone who has been a part of more of the those who I feel really comfortable and deepened into that tend to work more in like a sacred circle. And maybe you also desire to understand a little bit more about how, where, when to engage with life, not just in your sacred circle, which really has a beautiful form of protection and integration. And there's just so much there. But if you're there and that's what you do, then you know, so I don't need to explain it to you. But I do find that for some of us, for some of those of us who have practices like that, what can be really scary is bridging the space between us and others in a lighter, more surface kind of way. And so I am curious to see what can happen if I continue to breathe into that space. And I've had very specific visions asking me to do that, to not hold a circle, but learn how to present myself this way, like readable, digestible, boundaried, like a billboard. So I'm going to stand up and do a little something because that's what we did during the embodiment practice and it was working for me. So I'm going to do the tourist thing. I'll turn on the light too. Okay. I am now a tourist in self-care for performers because that's why we're here, right? Okay, what do I find? What do I find? What do I notice? I'm like, oh, if I were a tourist in self-care for performers, me as a tourist in this practice, in this way of being, so I've not seen this before, this is new to me. I kind of want to be like, wow, it's so free. Do I feel safe in this much freedom? I'm not sure. But there is something that feels kind of inviting about it. And there is talk about safety and boundaries. So am I allowed to bring mine here? And then I'm curious, like, can I test mine here? Like, will you let me test my boundaries here or will you be mean to me? And so I'm aware of that. And I want to see if I can find like almost like a jungle gym of ways in which I can try different avenues to see if it's actually going to be a safe space. If I were a tourist in self-care for performers, that's what I would need. I would need, because if I'm a tourist in self-care for performers, I probably have relational trauma. Because so much of what self-care for performers is, it's like those two things, right? It's like self-care and a performing artist. It's like when you hear about self-care and performers, it's like, well, okay, you have to care for yourself so you can go perform. So are you going to teach me how to be like rigidly stringent with myself and structured so that I can go perform? Because that's what I understand from here as the vacationer. I'm like, this doesn't make sense because this is what I understand. You know, you go somewhere new and you get like culture shock. You're like, oh, I don't understand it. They do things different here. So I'm like, I'm aware that like, but this is what I've known and this is what I anticipate. And I don't think I know how to put this down. So if I were on vacation here and I was like, I can't get past that the food is different in this country, kind of thing, that kind of concept, right? That tourist has an option. Tourists can be mad the whole time they're on vacation, right? And just be like, it's different. It's different. I don't understand it. I don't like it. Or they can be like, well, okay, let me try something new. Let me try this dish. Let me go to this environment. Which do I like? Do I want to go back again? Maybe I liked it. Do I want to try something new each time? Do I want to return here on vacation again next year? Do I like it so much that I want to stay and have a durational experience living here and see if I can have a sense of community connection? That scares me. Oh my goodness, does that scare me? As a vacationer here, it's like, as a vacationer here, if I'm someone with relational trauma, that's like, could this be a place that I could keep coming into connection with? Like, I have all these images for myself, and these are real images in my life of just being bullied by industry practices or by expectations of protocol that is just so harsh and so rigid and so exacting. And I don't know if I want to go back to that again, but I do know that if I'm going to ever be in a place where that doesn't feel so taxing on me, what I also need is to know something different. What I also need is to know that I have a safe space to practice advocating for myself and asking for my needs and then being met with kindness on the other end, as opposed to like a slap in the face. And what that allows me to do is practice asking with more kindness, as opposed to like rigidly standing up for my boundaries or letting them go completely and then getting beat up and then having to recover for long periods of time. Do you relate to that? I don't know. This is me, the tourist, through the lens of my experience as a performing artist prior to wanting, desiring self-care for performers just as like a home space to like trust and understand that like we're not all out there to hurt each other. And even some of us who aren't out there to hurt each other are still hurting each other. And sometimes I show up in ways where I'm like, oh, that wasn't great. And in my podcast, that's one thing I'm noticing as I'm sitting down to edit. And I haven't actually gotten to the parts where I'm like cringe yet, but I like can feel them coming. And I like remember my like thought patterns. I was so afraid. I was so afraid. And I just want to be in this right now because this feels important to the tourist and self-care for performers. If I'm a tourist here, I'm like, I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid. It's not of self-care for performers, it's of people, of space. Like, this is how I experience, if I'm honest about underneath the facade of the performing artist and underneath it, there's all of this like inner parts flailing and overwhelm that happens if I let myself remove the mask of that. And self-care for performers allows you to do that and like lets you love on yourself there and like lets it not only be okay, but like gives you the feedback that it's really normal to have been what you've been through and the way that you've been through it and to have this particular response. We hold cellularly, there's science to back up like 3 generations. So our parents and our grandparents, like we have the cellular memory of all the traumas they went through. And then we have the lived experience of all of the traumas we've went through. And trauma not being like the event itself, because some people carry with them trauma from things that other people aren't going to be traumatized from. And sometimes they can be really intense things, and sometimes they can be really small things. But it's about how the body, the psyche, the nervous system is able to understand that threat has passed and then come back into a regulated rhythm. And if you can't come back to a regulated rhythm, then you get stuck in a trauma response. And what I've found, I don't know if you find this, but as a vacationer in self-care for performers land, what I'm aware of is that I don't think I've ever really felt the possibility of safety. And so the possibility of safety in and of itself feels scary, because all my guards that have kept me protected, if they're not needed, who am I? I don't know. And so can I meet myself at those edges so that I also like, I don't have to let the guards down if I don't want to? Can I just get to know myself here and like love the guards, love the coping, love the structures of safety that I've built for myself? You might find the more you meet them, the more you might be like, I get it. I get it. I get it. And maybe we want to choose another way, but also maybe we don't want to rush it because maybe we still have a lot of active threat in certain areas of our life. And this particular coping style has worked for us. And maybe we are tired of it and want to find a different way, but that we don't get rid of the coping and then get hurt, that we make sure that we find a way before we let down the coping or the strategies, right? The safety strategies, before we let those go in the way they've been, that we find healthy distance from what could or would or has or will hurt us if we just stop the survival strategy without first orienting to safety and then coming into clarity of attunement and then coming into relational capacity and knowing that kindness isn't always like nice. It's not always pleasant. Sometimes kindness really hurts. Sometimes kindness is really hard. Sometimes it's harsh. Not harsh to be harsh, but sometimes the truth of the reality of really owning one's experience in relationship to another's owned experience. It requires a kind of truth telling that maybe would dissolve a relationship, at least as we've known it, even if it can be rebuilt in a different way. But trust and connection and safety, they're built slowly over time. And for those of you who feel like you need to rush your career forward, or like you're constantly falling behind, or like it's a make or break next audition, I want to offer you a different way. And hopefully it's a way that will allow you to get your underlying needs met first. And then, however, the performing arts can meet them, they can meet them. So that way, when you get performing arts experiences, when you do gain success, if that's a part of your path from a fully met space, then you won't feel depleted and lost and still just as sad and lonely on the other end of your goals. Because, they say it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. But truly, like learning how to truly, from a body-based understanding, soul-rooted, experiential holding that you've got you. Because you've got you, you can discern how much relational trust to honor in any given dynamic with the director, with the producer, with the choreographer, with your fellow performing artists, with your collaborators. And sometimes people make mistakes, and it's not about being exacting and perfectionistic. I have that recovery piece as well, but it is about really being honest. And sometimes we can still love someone and be like, hey, I don't think your capacity is where I need it to be right now to move forward in this direction. Do you agree? Right? Not because I don't want to work with you and you're a terrible person and you should be stronger than that, or like you're not showing up responsibly, or shame on you, like blame, guilt, all of that shutdown. That's not the game. It's really just like from a needs-based, capacity-driven clarity. How can I love myself and love you and love my needs and love your needs and love the project's needs, and then see where they do align potentially, and be honest about where they might not, or really legitimately don't. And having that not mean something bad about myself or about you or about the project, although there also may be key points of those things that are deal breakers for somebody on some end, right? But that there's this clarity of integrity that underneath of it all that retains a certain kind of distillation of just knowing what's the next right thing. And then from there, once you move through that grief and once you practice that a long time, I'm in this process right now. And I've been here in cycles and tidbits before, but then I get scared. And so I'm learning how to do it and like not get scared and like drop the ball. But things will start to show up for you, and they will start to meet you right where you're ready. And if you have built the capacity, and if you have enough self-regard and creative hope mixed with willingness to feel yourself as worthy of receiving the things that you've asked for, and then trusting that the patterns that you've built in your life are going to continue to sustain you regardless of how your waters of emotional life and mental health, things will change and they'll shift. And all we can do is just, there are plenty of ways we can do things, but I like to think of the best we can do, really, truly, no more, no less. And just the right thing to do is to just show up as we are and be more honest with ourselves and one another, and see if we can get to the undercurrent as opposed to the reaction. Yeah. And be with that. And then from there, if we want to play with reaction, then it becomes an artistry of expression. And that's where that self-care piece of the performing arts comes from. Because even if we choose to, for a role, maybe a character isn't connected to that, so we embody a disconnect from that kind of core sense of self-worth, but we still have the tools, the capacity to come back to it, the sort of soul remembrance of where it lives, knowing that it never leaves us, but we can consciously cultivate different relational patterns and dynamics and energy flows and currents to embody different relational dynamics for the characters we play in our work, in our creative work, as well as in our life, and the different roles we show up to: mother, daughter, sister, husband, lover, son, all of the things. Yeah. And those personal facets as well as beyond. So from there, my heart to you, relational artistry, really. That's the tourist witness. I'll see you next time, wherever that is. Bye.